What if the key to business success wasn't really about putting customers first, but employees? It's a pretty counterintuitive idea, right?
It really is. But it's at the very heart of this, well, remarkable transformation story we're going to dive into today.
Yeah, we're unpacking insights from Vineet Nayar's book. It basically chronicles his journey leading HCL Technologies, or HCLT, through a really unconventional but incredibly impactful shift.
Right. HCLT is one of India's major IT services companies. And our mission here is to explore how they went from kind of falling behind competitors to becoming a real industry leader.
And they did this by truly putting employees first, customers second. EFCS, they called it. So we'll get into the specific strategies, maybe some surprising challenges, and, the profound impacts of this unique approach.
Exactly. And if you've ever felt maybe overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of information out there, or you're curious about how companies genuinely change.
Or maybe you just want a fresh perspective on leadership and growth.
Yeah, precisely. This deep dive offers some practical lessons, I think, and inspiring aha moments. It really challenges conventional wisdom.
Could spark some new ideas for your own path, maybe?
Definitely.
Okay, so let's unpack this transformation. Where does this story really kick off?
It starts around early 2005. HCL Technologies, HCLT, was celebrating hitting over $700 million in annual revenue. They had decent growth, on paper.
Looked good on the surface.
Exactly. But beneath that veneer, HCLT was actually losing market share. And critically, losing mind share, especially outside India.
That's often harder to measure, the mindshare thing.
It is. And maybe even worse, some of their most talented people were quietly heading for the exits. Nayar observed the company suffered from a kind of blind spot, failing to notice this, like gradual decline while competitors were surging ahead.
It's a classic trap, isn't it? Successful companies get focused internally, miss the outside shifts.
Absolutely. It happens all the time. Unless there's a real obsession with constant self-assessment and change, that decline often goes unnoticed until it's suddenly a crisis.
So into this, slightly precarious situation steps Vineet Nayar. He was known for his success heading HCL ComNet, right? Built it from scratch.
Yeah, a real entrepreneurial track record there.
So given the state HCLT was in, how big a deal was it that he apparently took the job only if he could do it my way? And the chairman, Shiv Nadar, actually agreed without knowing what that way was.
Oh, that was absolutely pivotal. Huge. It signaled right away that Nayar understood this couldn't be just, tinkering around the edges. It needed a fundamental overhaul.
Right.
And for Nadar to agree,
wow,
that speaks volumes about the level of trust, maybe desperation too, within HCLT's leadership at that point. It basically gave Nayar the mandate he needed for some pretty radical experimentation.
And that freedom led him to this key insight early on, something relevant for any transformation, really. You have to define your current reality, your point A.
With brutal honesty.
Yeah, just as much honesty as you define your goal, your point B. If you ignore where you truly stand, any plan forward is just, wishful thinking.
And that point A for HCLT was complex. The whole IT industry was shifting dramatically.
How so?
Well, the Chief Information Officer, the CIO, their role was changing. They weren't just a competent caretaker anymore. They were becoming strategic change agents focused on business agility.
Okay.
But, most HCLT employees hadn't really grasped the full implications of that fundamental shift. They were still operating a bit in the old model.
So how do you get thousands of people to see a reality that even management had been slow to acknowledge? Nayar knew apparently it couldn't be just memos or PowerPoints.
No way. It had to be face-to-face.
Yeah.
So he launched what he called the Mirror Mirror exercise.
Mirror.
On his very first day as president, he got on a plane, spent 2 weeks visiting facilities, talking directly, honestly, about HCLT's point A.
Wow, first day. What did he tell them?
He told them the company had lost its edge, that it was too tolerant of slow, gradual change when the industry was moving fast. And he actually said it could crash any day.
Oof. How did that go down?
Well, the initial reactions were pretty much what you'd expect. Silence, shock, maybe even hurt feelings. It's tough hearing those kinds of truths.
Yeah, especially when it feels personal about your work, your company.
Exactly. But Nayar knew that initial pain was necessary. He needed their buy-in, their agreement on point A for anything else to work. And he noticed people fell into roughly 3 groups based on their reactions.
Okay, what were the groups?
First, the transformers. These were the people, just waiting for someone to lead the charge, eager for change, maybe even aggressive and angry about the status quo. They wanted action, like yesterday.
Got it. The change agents within.
Then you had the lost souls.
Mm-hmm.
These folks felt pretty hopeless. They believed basically whatever we were doing or whatever we proposed to do was hopeless and wrong. Just total cynicism.
That's tough. And the third.
The fence sitters, complacent, blaming external stuff. Oh, the economy's terrible. Companies are failing everywhere. They were convinced nothing HCLT did internally could really fix it.
Right. It's easier to blame outside forces than look inward sometimes. I bet finding those transformers early was key for Nayar. Gave him some allies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They'd be the initial energy source.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about employees looking in the mirror. Nayar shared a really powerful story about himself, too.
Oh, yeah.
From back in 1985, early in his HCL career. He had an MBA, tons of confidence, but a senior exec told him flat out he had no future because he was too focused on strategy, not enough on products.
Wow.
Yeah. It forced him, he said, to confront his own blind spots and totally change his approach.
That takes guts for a CEO to admit publicly, showing vulnerability like that.
It really does. It kind of disarms people, right?
Yeah.
Shows that honest self-reflection isn't just for the troops. It's for everyone, leadership included. That shared vulnerability can be a huge catalyst.
Yeah. So, building on that, Nayar had another critical realization. Talking to customers, watching younger Gen Y employees who were all over social media.
Yeah.
He realized that in a services company, especially in a knowledge economy, the real action, the value zone, is that direct interface between the customer and the employee.
Makes sense. That's where the solution happens, the problem gets solved.
Right. And the big takeaway was that management's job needed to shift. Less about control, more about enabling those frontline folks. Getting out of their way, frankly, instead of demanding endless presentations.
Instead of asking for reports, ask, what can we do to help you?
Exactly. And this insight led to that really radical idea to turn the whole organizational chart upside down.
The inverted pyramid.
Yeah. Make management, HR, finance, training, all those enabling functions accountable to the people in the value zone. That was the seed of employees first, customers second.
It's a profound shift in thinking about structure and power.
For sure. But even with this radical new idea bubbling up, there was still a lot of skepticism, right?
Oh, absolutely. People are wondering, is employees first, customers second? Just fancy talk for downsizing? You know, the usual corporate speak fears.
Right. People started debating HCLT's future, which Nayar actually saw as a good sign of engagement at least. But it wasn't the transformation they needed yet.
No, not yet. So, to move things forward, Nayar gathered HCLT's 100 best and brightest brains in Delhi, July 2005. A 3-day blueprint meeting.
Okay, the brain trusts.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And they reached a consensus, a bold move towards integrated services, focusing on value. Strategy agreed. But Nayar sensed this, like pervasive lack of trust. Not in the strategy itself, maybe, but in the company's ability to actually pull it off. He even reflected that his own personal trust quotient was lower than he thought it was.
It's one thing to have a plan, quite another to have people believe you can actually do it. Especially something this different.
Precisely. So how do you build that trust?
Yeah.
Nayar got inspired by how families, ideally shift from command and control to being based on trust. He identified transparency as the key. Letting the light in, making sure everyone knows the vision, everyone feels personally committed.
And they went big on transparency, didn't they? Not just small steps.
No half measures here. Truly novel initiatives. First, Nayar floated the idea of sharing all financial information. Good, bad, everything, with all employees.
Whoa. Like in a family where you share the budget woes?
Kinda, yeah. And objections flew in immediately. People will get demotivated. Competitors will get the info.
I can imagine the pushback.
Totally. But they implemented it.
Yeah.
And Nayar says it led to deeper, more honest conversations across the company. People started talking reality.
Okay, that's one major transparency piece. What else?
Then came You and I, an online forum. The goal was to create an open office feel, but for tens of thousands of employees scattered globally.
So anyone could post anything. Questions for leadership.
Any employee, any question. And Nayar or his team would answer. Critically, all questions and all answers were visible to everyone.
That sounds terrifying for leadership. What if it just became a complaint fest?
Well, their initial fears were justified. Nayar says the site was absolutely clogged with cribs and complaints at first.
Oh, man. So what did they do? Shut it down? Filter it?
Nope. And this was the crucial part, I think. The courage to not pull the plug showed they were serious about listening.
Okay.
That transparency, even when it was painful, started to shift the conversation. Employees saw their issues acknowledged, questions answered. It moved slowly from just, what's wrong, to, Okay, what can we actually do about this? Trust went up significantly. People felt leadership finally got it.
So financials open, U&I forum buzzing. What was the acid test? Did customers buy into this?
Ah, the ultimate test, right? February 2006. HCLT invites 300 CIOs from around the world to Delhi. Big event. They're there to discuss this whole EFCS approach.
And they broadcasted it internally, too.
The whole thing,
Yeah.
live to all employees. Nayar stood up and basically said, look, success isn't just about the tech anymore. It's about how solutions are implemented, the sustained business benefit you get. And that, he argued, came from enabling employees.
How did the CIOs react? This is pretty unconventional stuff to pitch to your clients.
It was definitely mixed. Some customers apparently saw it as too little too late and actually canceled contracts. Ouch.
Yikes.
Others decided to wait and see. But the transformers among the customers, the ones ready for a new way of working, they were enthusiastic. Some even offered to help HCLT refine the approach.
Okay, so some validation, some skepticism. Did it translate into business?
It did, and faster than maybe expected. Just 6 months after that Delhi meeting, boom, a $263 million deal with Dixon's, then a $70 million deal with Teradyne.
Wow.
In just 12 months, they won $700 million in large outsourcing deals, and they were winning against the big four global IT providers.
So the industry started noticing.
Big time. IDC, the analyst firm, called HCLT disruptive and bears watching. They even suggested HCLT might lead the IT services world of the very near future.
That's a huge turnaround in perception.
Massive. And what's fascinating, Nayar stresses these huge changes weren't from some meticulously pre-planned, complex program. They were sparked by just a few catalyst ideas.
Simple actions, big ripples.
Exactly. Simple actions, rather than elaborate programs, as he put it, suggest small, unconventional shifts can have really outsized effects.
Okay, so they had big wins, industry buzz, but Nayar was worried about backsliding.
Yeah, he felt the gains weren't, embedded deeply enough yet. He realized that just tinkering with the process wasn't going to cut it long term.
He had an analogy for this, right? Something about a farm.
Yeah, a summer job on a poultry farm. He said no amount of process optimization changed the fundamental way they carried eggs. To make a real leap, you needed fundamental structural change.
Right. Optimize the old system? You still have the old system.
Precisely. And he saw the traditional pyramid structure itself as a problem. Senior managers, way up top, far from the real action,
The value zone.
could exercise this kind of hand of God decision, often getting in the way of actual value creation without really meaning to.
So the core idea became reverse accountability.
Exactly. Making the boss as accountable to the value zone as the value zone was accountable to the boss. Flip the script.
How did they start making that real?
They look at the enabling functions. First, HR, finance, IT places, often seen as bottlenecks by employees on the ground. This led to the Smart Service Desk, or SSD.
Okay, so SD, what was that?
Conceptually, they adapted it from HCLT's Customer Problem Management System. But this was internal. Employees could open electronic tickets for any issue they had.
Like an IT problem or an HR query?
Yeah, a problem, a query, even a work request. And they could direct it to any enabling function or even up to senior management, including the CEO.
And the key was the accountability piece.
Absolutely.
Well-
Here's the genius part.
Yeah.
If a ticket wasn't resolved within a set time, it automatically escalated. But crucially, the employee who opened the ticket decided if it was resolved satisfactorily.
So the employee controlled closing the ticket.
Yes, they could refuse a closed status, keeping the clock ticking on that manager or function. Power to the employee.
How did the managers in HR and finance feel about suddenly having their performance measured this way by frontline staff?
Initially, not thrilled. Nayar said they felt unfairly characterized, maybe unappreciated. The classic yes, but reaction.
Yes, but you don't understand how complex our job is.
Exactly that kind of thing. But pretty soon, they started seeing it differently. As a way to actually measure our performance, share it with people, and change their perception, it became a tool for them too.
What was the impact? Did it work?
Hugely significant, according to Nayar. It totally leveled the playing field. Didn't matter where you were in the hierarchy, you could get your issue addressed.
And the data must have been revealing.
Immensely.
Mm-hmm.
The SSD data started showing the root causes of problems. Was it a bad policy? Poor communication? Flawed execution? Functions could see their own patterns.
So they could fix the system, not just the symptoms.
Right. They even started aiming for a zero-ticket week, which led to these long-standing annoying problems finally disappearing. Stuff that had probably frustrated employees for years.
Okay, so SSD tackled accountability for support functions. What about manager accountability more broadly?
Next, they tackled performance reviews. The traditional 360-degree review, right, where peers, subordinates, bosses give feedback.
Yeah, pretty standard now.
But HCLT opened it up radically. Anyone who gave feedback could now see the manager's overall results. Anonymized, presumably, but the aggregated report was visible.
Ah, so it wasn't just the boss seeing the feedback.
Exactly. That immediately reduced the boss's kind of unilateral power over the interpretation. It made the team in the value zone a much bigger determinant of the outcome, of how that manager was perceived.
And they took it even further with something called Happy Feet.
Yeah, Happy Feet expanded the concept. It allowed any employee, even a brand new hire, to evaluate any manager whose work influenced theirs. Didn't matter if they reported to them or not.
Any manager. Wow, how many people did that affect?
It started with about 1,500 managers in 2005, but grew to 3,500 by 2009, so a significant chunk of leadership.
That sounds potentially like a recipe for chaos, or at least a popularity contest, if you're not careful. How did Nayar make sure it was actually useful, developmental feedback, not just about who brings donuts?
That's a really valid concern, and they thought about it. The absolute key, Nayar insists, was that these open 360 reviews were purely for development. They were not linked to appraisals or bonuses.
Ah, okay. That removes the incentive to just game the system for a raise.
Precisely. It took the pressure off, made it about growth, not judgment. And because managers knew the feedback in aggregate was visible, they were apparently far more motivated to actually use it to change their style and improve.
It taps into that wisdom of crowds idea Nayar mentioned, trusting the collective view.
Right. Trusting that the many know more than the few, especially when it comes to a manager's day-to-day impact.
And throughout all this structural change, SSD, Open 360's communication was key.
Constant communication. Nayar really hammered this point. He recalled this old business school exercise where a staged incident happened and all the students perceived it completely differently afterwards.
Yeah, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable.
Exactly. It highlighted for him the absolute need for clear, consistent messaging to make sure everyone understood why these changes were happening and what the intent was. You couldn't overcommunicate.
Did they get external validation for this inverted pyramid idea? Proof it was working beyond just internal metrics.
Yes, a really powerful example came in 2006. The CEO of a Fortune 100 customer called Nayar and invited him to speak. Why?
Why?
Because he'd heard about HCLT's open 360-degree survey directly from an HCLT employee working on his account, someone working at the bottom of the HCLT pyramid, as Nayar put it.
So an empowered employee talking openly about internal practices impressed a major client CEO.
Exactly. That personal connection, driven by an employee who felt trusted and informed, directly led to HCLT becoming one of that company's largest IT partners. For Nayar, that was huge proof they were on the right path.
Okay, so HCLT has inverted the pyramid, built transparency, empowered employees, huge changes. But Nayar felt there was still more to do.
Yeah, he realized that despite all these changes, HCLT was still operating, in his words, like a spider.
A spider?
Centralized, cut off the spider's head, the body dies. HCLT was still too dependent on the CEO's head, on his vision and drive.
Right. It wasn't self-sustaining yet.
Exactly. To be truly sustainable, truly resilient, it needed to become more like a starfish.
Starfish. Decentralized.
Yeah, cut off a starfish's arm, it can grow back, and the arm might even become a new starfish. Decentralized, leaderless in a way, resilient. The goal was to transfer the responsibility for change beyond just the CEO.
That's often the hardest leap for a leader, right? To genuinely let go of control and trust the system they've built.
Absolutely. It requires immense trust. But he started seeing signs it was happening organically. Wow. He discovered one of his teams had proactively implemented an unreleased internal program.
Something they weren't supposed to use yet.
Right. It was called Business Aligned IT, or BIT, basically a framework to make sure IT solutions actually aligned with specific business outcomes. This team had self-learned the framework in their spare time and rolled it out for a customer.
Wow. Without being told.
Exactly. It showed this unconscious transfer of responsibility was already starting to happen. People felt empowered to take initiative.
So how did he encourage more of that? How do you actively push responsibility downwards?
Well, he used the U&I forum again. He added a new section called My Problems.
His problems, the CEO's problems.
Yes. As CEO, he started posting his own unsolved dilemmas. Things like, how do we change the perception of IT analysts about HCLT? Or other strategic challenges he was grappling with.
What was the thinking there?
It did a couple of things. First, it publicly acknowledged his own limitations. The CEO doesn't have all the answers. Second, it explicitly invited the entire company, all that distributed knowledge, to help solve top-level problems. It was like taking a chip out of the marble facade of the office of the CEO.
Humanizing the leadership, tapping the collective intelligence. Very clever.
And it went beyond just solving problems. Nayar felt they needed to move beyond just employee satisfaction or even engagement. He wanted to tap into employees' passion.
Passion. How do you measure passion?
Well, they tried. They developed something called the Employee Passion Indicative Count, or EPIC survey, trying to understand what employees truly loved doing, what motivated them intrinsically.
Okay, and what do they do with that insight?
It fed into creating employee-first councils. These were communities that formed around shared interests, some personal, like photography clubs, but many focused on business issues, like cloud computing or specific technologies.
So self-organizing groups around shared interests.
Exactly. And these councils started generating real business ideas, even new revenue streams. It fostered this kind of unstructured innovation moving idea generation way beyond just the traditional leadership team or R&D department.
Letting innovation bubble up from anywhere.
Right, and they even democratized strategy setting itself.
How did that work? Weren't strategy meetings usually top-level, closed-door affairs?
Traditionally, yes. But in 2009, instead of the usual leadership offsite, they had 300 managers record their strategic plans, videos, presentations.
Okay.
Then these recordings were posted on an internal portal called My Blueprint, and it was open for review by 8,000 other managers across the company.
8,000 managers reviewing each other's plans.
Yeah. It created this massive peer-to-peer review process. It brought planning much closer to the value zone, closer to the people who actually had to execute the strategy. And again, it shifted responsibility away from being solely top-down.
What was the effect?
Nayar described it as astonishing. The quality of the plans, the engagement, the cross-pollination of ideas was apparently incredible.
It really embodies that starfish idea, the intelligence distributed throughout the system.
Totally. Nayar profoundly believes that transferring power, transferring responsibility is crucial because the CEO is simply always too far away from the value zone to really understand the zone.
So the CEO's role changes fundamentally.
Completely. It becomes less about having the answers and giving directions and more about enabling others. Enable people to excel, Nayar says. Help them discover their own wisdom, engage themselves entirely in their work, and accept responsibility for making change. The ultimate aim. A self-governing, self-organizing company.
Wow, that's a radically different view of leadership. Now, a common criticism or maybe misunderstanding of EFCS was that, sure, it sounds nice in good times, but it wouldn't work during tough times, like cost-cutting. Did HCLT face that test?
They absolutely did. Head on during the 2008 global recession. That was the big test case everyone was watching.
So recession hits. What happens? Did EFCS go out the window?
No. Instead of top-down mandates for cuts, Nayar and his team went back to the employees. They launched an initiative called Smart Response.
Oh, okay.
They sought input from 10,000 employees through live events, online forums, asking them for ideas on how to navigate the crisis efficiently and effectively.
So crowdsourcing the recession response.
Pretty much. And
Yeah.
it led to 15 concrete initiatives being implemented based on that employee feedback.
What kinds of initiatives came out of that? Anything surprising?
Well, perhaps the most surprising and maybe controversial were employee suggestions to actually let go of persistent underperformers.
Employees suggested letting colleagues go.
Yeah. The rationale that came up was about fairness, weeding out the free riders, as they put it, and ensuring that high performers felt their efforts were recognized and valued, especially during tough times.
That's fascinating. How did Nayar balance that kind of, tough feedback from the bottom up with the whole employees first idea? Didn't that risk eroding trust?
That's where the nuance, I think, is really important. It wasn't about EFCS meaning nice to everyone no matter what. It was about creating an environment where high performance and mutual accountability were valued by the employees themselves.
Ah, okay.
Because the suggestion came from the employee base, it wasn't seen as a harsh top-down edict. It felt more like a collective decision for the overall health and fairness of the organization. It actually reinforced the idea that employees first also meant fostering a meritocracy and ensuring collective success wasn't dragged down.
So it validated that employees were truly taking ownership, even for the tough decisions.
Exactly. And the results during that recession were pretty remarkable.
What happened?
While many competitors were struggling laying people off, HCLT grew 20% year after year right through the downturn. They closed major orders, added thousands of jobs globally.
Grew 20% during the 2008 recession. That's counter-narrative.
Totally. And Nayar said customers repeatedly told him, your employees made the magic happen. Their engagement, their proactivity during the crisis really shone through.
Wow.
Nayar uses this analogy, the ant to butterfly. Companies shouldn't just aim to be fast-walking ants, super efficient within the existing rules. They need to transform into butterflies.
Meaning?
Taking a completely unconventional route, like Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolence movement, to reach an amazing place that incremental improvements could never get you to. EFCS was their butterfly transformation.
He also tackled the criticism that maybe this only works in certain industries or cultures, right? The not applicable everywhere argument.
Yeah, he recounted this conversation with the CEO of a big Chinese hotel chain, let's call him Huang. Huang was boasting about his impressive 22% annual growth.
Pretty good growth.
Right. But Nayar challenged him. He asked, why not 40% or 50%?
Build question.
Hong was probably taken aback. But Nayar's point was, once you've optimized all your tangible assets, your buildings, your processes, the only way to get that next big leap ahead is by focusing on your human capital, by putting employees first to unlock that discretionary effort and innovation.
Interesting challenge. So, looking back at HCLT's journey, what were the tangible results over those first 4 years or so?
The numbers are pretty impressive. A 70% increase in employee satisfaction scores. East Attica, revenues tripled. Operating income also tripled.
Tripled revenue and income plus higher satisfaction. That's the dream combo.
It really is. And Nayar adds, they did it all while having lots of fun, which shouldn't be underestimated as a factor.
Definitely not. So is EFCS like a program you implement and then you're done?
No, he's very clear on this. It's not a one-time fix. He calls it a cycle that ceaselessly starts and restarts. You always need to be looking for new catalysts, new ways to push the boundaries, keep the energy going. It's a continuous journey.
And it wasn't just his journey.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
He views the book and the whole transformation as having 55,000 authors, every employee at HCLT. He stresses it was a collective act, and one that transformed him personally, too, revealing new horizons he couldn't have seen alone.
That's a powerful way to frame it. So let's try and wrap this up. What are the core ideas we've explored here?
We've really seen how HCLT fundamentally redefined success. They inverted that traditional corporate pyramid, making management accountable to the value zone the employees interacting with customers, and crucially, they empowered those employees to actually drive change.
Yeah, and this deep dive really highlighted the power of some specific, quite radical tactics, that intense transparency with you and I and opening the financials.
The impact of reverse accountability through the Smart Service Desk and those open 360 reviews.
And that crucial piece about tapping into employee passion, not just satisfaction, through things like the Employee First Councils and democratizing strategy with my blueprint.
It's just a really strong reminder, I think, that truly transformative change often demands challenging our deepest assumptions. Assumptions about leadership, about control, about who actually holds the power to innovate inside an organization.
Definitely food for thought. So thinking about HCLT's journey, maybe a final provocative thought for you listening. What single catalyst, maybe just a small droplet, could you introduce, perhaps in your own team or an area you influence, just a small, maybe unconventional shift towards greater trust or transparency or shared responsibility?
What might that first small step look like in your world?